So, talking a bit more about comparative anatomy in a specific field called comparative embryology, which looks at different species embryos for physical similarities and differences. So, it's a fact that related species go through similar stages of development in the embryo, and only as development progresses do the embryos become more distinct. Viewing the origin of certain structures is much more intuitive in the embryo than in the adult. For instance, the pharyngeal arches, which originally gave rise to the gills in fish, were adapted in tetrapods to give rise to the structures of the nerves and of the neck, as well as the structure of the neck itself. Now, in the embryos of both fish and tetrapods, these pharyngeal arches are still present, but as the embryo develops, we're able to understand how these primitive structures have been adapted through the course of evolution to give rise to new structures. These comparative structures in embryology gave rise to a now discredited idea or theory called recapitulation theory, which posited that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. So, in English, basically, development of an embryo requires the embryo to go through all of its ancestral forms, like speedy evolution, before the evolved organism can be born. So, the idea of recapitulation theory, put forth by, I think, Ernst Haeckel, it was basically, he looked at the embryos, he saw that in vertebrates we had these pharyngeal arch structures, and he saw that, and he thought, okay, that looks like gills. It would make sense that in order for the embryo to fully develop, it was going from its kind of small unicellular phase growing, becoming a kind of fish-like creature, and then it would kind of evolve and evolve and evolve, and then go through all of our kind of evolutionary processes. So you can kind of imagine, for humans to evolve, we started off as sarcopterygian fish, so lobe-finned fish, developed into the early tetrapods with 4 limbs, and then we accumulated mutations and differentiated into our modern form. He thought that we were going through all these forms in the embryo. We now know that's not true, it's nonsense, but it's an important idea to kind of remember. So just taking a look at what we mean when we're talking about related species going through similar stages of development. Well, if you look at the images on the left, here and here, they are the same organism. You can probably guess from the bottom photo that it's a bat. Meanwhile, if you look to the ones on the right, you can probably guess, well, you probably can't, but from the bottom photo here that I'm highlighting, that's actually a cat embryo. Now, you can see that at these stages of development, they look quite different, but at these stages of development, they're almost identical. If I put a load of embryos in front of you and told you to tell me whether it's a cat or a bat or whatever, or a human, at this stage, you probably wouldn't be able to get it right. But as they develop and their structures become more defined, it's easier to understand. So these structures in the early stages of embryonic development, they're conserved evolutionarily. So all of these organisms are going through these similar stages early in embryonic development because our ancestors went through those stages, so they've basically just been evolutionarily conserved. Some of the genetic evidence for evolution. The fact that all organisms on Earth use the exact same codon table of DNA or RNA combinations to produce the exact same amino acids, well, that's strong evidence for a common ancestor of all life because it's completely arbitrary. If you look here, at the very top left, it says you need 3 uracils UUU for a phenylalanine amino acid at the translation process, okay? Now, it doesn't have to be that. There's no specific reason that it has to be a UUU for phenylalanine, you know? It could be a GGG, but the way that life kind of works, because we've all come from a common ancestor that used the exact same codons in their DNA to kind of be transcribed, translated, and then become polypeptides. So the ribosomes are only able to recognize these codons. They could be anything, but in all life they follow this exact same codon chart. Hopefully that kind of made sense. Basically, just each codon that we have, so each of these three base stretches of RNA shown on the table, which code for each amino acid. The combination of the bases is completely arbitrary, so it doesn't really matter what bases that you use for each codon to produce each amino acid. It shouldn't matter, but all life has the exact same codon table, which we would imagine is because we all share a single common ancestor. DNA sequencing of genomes can also be used to construct a phylogenetic tree based on molecular analysis. So moving on, an adaptation refers to a characteristic that enhances the probability of survival or reproduction of the organism possessing it, compared to the characteristics of other organisms. So, for example, the peppered moths, like I talked about in the last one, on the bottom right here. We know that in the Industrial Revolution, apparently birch trees got covered in soot, making them black, giving the black moths a camouflage, giving them camouflage on these trees, giving them a survival advantage, so they were temporarily naturally selected during this period. We would call the black colour an adaptation because it's conferring a survival advantage onto the black moths who have these black genes. These ideas create an interesting and well-known example, but it should be noted that these stories are hard to falsify, so the idea of these birch trees being covered in soot, it makes a nice idea, but if you've ever gone mothing or looking for butterflies, you would probably know that you hardly ever actually see moths sat on birch trees like we're told in the example. They're usually up in the canopy with their wings folded, so it shouldn't really matter, but apparently it does. Just quickly, another example of an adaptation that Darwin would have observed were the beaks of the finches on the Galapagos Islands. The top finch has a short and wide beak for crushing nuts and seeds, while this other finch has a longer and narrower beak for probably eating insects. These beak shapes are adaptations that confer survival advantages. So in periods where there's lots of seeds, the adaptation of a thick beak is going to confer a survival advantage, and these guys are going to increase in frequency, so they're going to reproduce more, so they've got more food. where when there's not many seeds around, the narrow beak that eats insects